One of the reasons I left my government job was this feeling. This feeling of being a cog in a machine I didn't understand and couldn't control. A machine that made massive decisions affecting millions of people, but that nobody on the outside seemed to know existed. I thought I'd escape that world. I thought I'd start my own business. I'll be in control of my own destiny. I'll build something real and authentic. Then I ran into the CRTC. Well, not directly. They didn't send me a letter, but they're there, in the background. When I pay my internet bill, which is one of the highest in the world, by the way, when I try and find Canadian made shows on Netflix, which aren't that great, when I think about the future of my business and how I'm going to reach my audience, this entity, this unelected, unaccountable, incredibly powerful agency that has had its hands in everything we watch, everything we listen to, and the very infrastructure of our digital lives, and nobody ever really talks about it. Well, today we're going to talk about it. We're going to drag the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission into the light. Because if you're a Canadian entrepreneur, a creator, or just somebody tired of feeling that the system's rigged against you, you need to know about the CRTC. This is where it's going to get a little weird, though. Okay, so what is this thing? The name itself is a bureaucratic alphabet soup. The CRTC, Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission. On paper, it's an independent federal agency that regulates broadcasting and telecommunications. It was created back in 1968 to make sure that Canadian voices were heard on Canadian airwaves. Noble goal: keep our culture from being completely swallowed by the giant neighbor to the south. But here's the thing about bureaucracies: they grow. And in 1976, they added telecommunications to the mix. So now not only were they in charge of what was on the TV and radio, they were in charge of the pipes, the phone lines, the internet cables, and the very infrastructure of modern commerce and communication. And the people who run it, they're not elected. They're appointed by the government of today. Yeah, liberals. For a 5-year term, they're supposed to be the experts operating at arm's length from politics. But let's be real. When you're appointed by the government, who do you ultimately answer to? And this is the fundamental problem. We have a small group of unelected people in Ottawa making massive decisions about our culture and our economy. Decisions that can make or break a small business. Decisions that determine your voice as a Canadian creator get heard. And here's the kicker: most Canadians have no idea who they are and what they do. I mean, can you name a single CRTC commissioner? I can't. And I literally researched this for weeks. So let me break this down for you. Because understanding how something works is the first step to changing it. The CRTC is led by the chairperson and CEO. Currently, that is Vicky Eatrise, appointed in 2023. She comes from the Competition Bureau, which is interesting because it suggests the government wanted somebody focused on competition and consumer protection. Then you've got up to 13 commissioners total. They're all appointed for a 5-year term. They come from different provinces, different backgrounds, and they're supposed to bring diverse perspectives. In theory, that's great. In practice, that means it's a very small group of people, most of whom you've never heard of, have the power to regulate your internet, your phone bill, and what shows Netflix can put on your homepage. And they do this through a process that's supposed to be transparent and consultative. The CRTC holds public hearings. They've taken written submissions. They publish their decisions with detailed reasoning. But that's where it gets murky. They also meet privately with industry, with big telecom companies and broadcasters, and the streaming services. These meetings are not recorded, they're not public, and the CRTC doesn't have to disclose what was discussed. So you've got a situation where you've got big players having a direct line to the regulators, and the little guys, the entrepreneurs, the investors, the weird ones, are left to the outside. looking in. And that's the systems we're working within. That's the machine I'm trying to understand. So, how did we get here? How did an agency created to regulate TV guide listings and within the power to regulate Netflix? And that's a story of slow, steady, relentless power creep. And it's a story that should matter to you because it's a story about how the government agencies expand their authority without anybody really noticing. For decades, it was just TV and radio. The CRTC would license broadcasters and make sure they met Canadian content requirements. They enforced rules. It was a contained system. Then in the 1990s and the 2000s, the internet happened. And the CRTC, like any good bureaucracy, saw a new frontier to regulate. And they just decided. They decided internet service providers were telecommunication carriers. And just like that, they were in charge of the internet. No new law, no parliamentary debate, just an interpretation of an existing authority. And for a while, that worked. The internet was growing, competition was increasing, and the CRTC's role was relatively limited. But then something else changed. The streaming war started. Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, Apple TV. These companies were making billions of dollars in Canada, but they weren't subject to the same traditional broadcasters. The government looked at this and said, that's not fair. These companies should have to contribute to Canadian culture, just like our own broadcasters. So in 2023, they passed the Online Streaming Act, Bill C-11. Yeah, that's the big one. That was the moment the CRTC's mandate exploded. Suddenly, Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, YouTube, they were all under the CRTC's thumb. And the CRTC could impose conditions on them, force them to invest in Canadian content, dictate how Canadian shows were promoted on their platform. Now, think about that. An unelected agency in Ottawa is telling global companies like Netflix what to put on your homepage. And it happened with barely a whisper of public debate. It was just pushed through Parliament. And now we're living through the consequences. Do you like what you see on your homepage? The CRTC's issued regulations. Streaming services are making 25 million or more in Canadian revenues have to invest 5% of those revenues in Canadian content. Netflix, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime all challenged this in court. They said the CRTC didn't have any authority to impose such requirements. As of right now, the federal court hasn't ruled yet. But the streaming services are already making investments in Canadian content to comply with the requirement. So the CRTC's power is expanding, and the legal boundaries of that power are still being tested in court. But here's where things really get to me. This expansion happened without clear public conversation, whether it was a good idea. What happened? It happened because the government decided it was right policy, and they delegated that implementation to the CRTC. Now, if you're a small independent creator in Canada, you have to ask yourself, who is this system really designed to benefit? The big established production companies who know how to work the system, or you? This affects all of us. Like the shit content you see on TV and movies nowadays are because of these regulations. So this is where it gets personal for me and for you if you're trying to build something in this country. The big criticism about the CRTC is the lack of accountability. And I want to be clear about what I mean by that. The laws the CRTC operates under are incredibly vague. The Broadcasting Act talks about public interest. The Telecommunications Act talks about reasonable rates. The Online Streaming Act talks about meaningful contribution to Canadian content. But what does any of that even mean? It means the CRTC decides what it means on any given day. And that's where the danger lies. This isn't a system of clear rules. It's a system of discretion, of interpretation, of backroom meetings. The CRTC meets privately with big telecommunications and media companies. The very companies it's supposed to be regulating, they call it consultation, but it looks like it's lobbying. It looks like the system where the big players have a direct line to the regulators and the little guys are left outside. We saw this already play out with the Super Bowl ads. For decades, we got Canadian ads during the Super Bowl. It was a policy deemed simultaneous substitution. Canadian broadcasters had effectively rights to the game, and they could substitute their own commercials. Then in 2016, the CRTC decided, in public interest, that we should see American ads instead. Bell Canada and the NFL sued, and the Supreme Court of Canada had to step in and say, whoa, you don't actually have the power to do that. The Supreme Court overruled the CRTC's decision. But that's the pattern. The CRTC keeps on pushing the boundaries of its power. It keeps trying to expand its authority. Because that's what bureaucracies do. They expand. They consume. And they justify it all with vague, good-feeling language about public interest. But is it in the interest of public to have some of the highest internet and cell phone prices in the developed world? Is it in the public interest to have a system that funnels money into the handful of government-approved Canadian creators, while independent voices struggle to be heard? As a neurodivergent entrepreneur, I see patterns. The pattern I see here is one of control. A centralized, top-down system that stifles innovation and picks winners and losers. It's the exact opposite of open, decentralized, permissionless world that the internet was supposed to create. It's a system that is, by very nature, anti-weird. And here's another thing that bothers me. The CRTC has made some decisions that are genuinely unpredictable. Their interpretations of Canadian content has evolved over time. Their approach to broadcast regulations have shifted. Their definition of what counts as reasonable rates have changed based on market conditions and policy priorities. So we've got a situation where these regulated industries can't predict how the CRTC will rule in similar cases. There's no clear rules. It's just the CRTC's discretion. Up to 13 people in Canada get to choose what happens when. And that creates uncertainty. And that uncertainty is the enemy of innovation. That's why we don't have good things being made in Canada. Because why? We can make something 100% in Canada and they deem it not Canadian because it talks about something not Canadian. If you're a small business trying to navigate Canadian telecommunications or broadcasting regulations, you don't know what rules are going to happen next year. You don't know what the CRTC is going to decide. So you just have to assume the worst. Build in extra costs, and those costs get passed on to your consumer. Or you just don't bother. You don't invest in Canada. You go somewhere else where these rules are a lot clearer. Now, I want to be intellectually honest here. There are arguments for the CRTC, and I think they're important to present them, because it isn't a simple issue. The first argument is expertise. Regulating these complex industries requires technical knowledge that politicians do not have. Telecommunications networks are incredibly complex, and broadcasting regulations are intricate. So we delegate it to our experts. Okay, I get that. But expertise without accountability is still a dangerous thing. And that is the core issue. Accountability. The second argument is that the CRTC protects Canadian culture. That without it, that we'd be cultural colony of the United States. And you know what? There's some truth to that. We saw it over the last couple of years where we kind of merged with US content. Canadian content rules have helped build Canadian film and the television industry as we know it today. A lot of those things are taking place right here on the Rock. So it is helping. They help. Like Schitt's Creek and Orphan Black. They're shooting Severance out here, and a few others. There are shows that might not have been made without Canadian content requirements. But at what cost? And is the definition of Canadian content so narrow it excludes truly weird and truly innovative and truly independent voices? That's the question I can't answer. The third argument is that the CRTC promotes competition. And they'll point out to recent decisions forcing Bell Canada to share fiber networks with smaller competitors. That's a good thing, right? More competition, lower prices. But it's a solution to the problem the CRTC itself helped create by allowing a handful of giants to dominate the market for decades. If we hadn't had the CRTC to stick up for the big guys, we'd have a lot more of the small guys. So yes, there are counter arguments. But to me, they feel like justifications for a system that had been fundamentally broken for years, and a system that concentrates power in the hands of a few unelected, unaccountable people. And that's not acceptable in democracy. Now, I'm not the kind of person who just complains. I'm about building things. I'm about finding solutions. So, what's the solution here? We have a few options. None of them are perfect, but they're worth considering. One, we could force Parliament to do its fucking job and amend the laws. Get rid of the vague language, write clear, specific rules that limit the CRTC's discretion, make it a regulator, not a ruler. The problem with this approach is that it might reduce the CRTC's flexibility. If Parliament writes very specific rules, the CRTC might not be able to adapt to changing circumstances. But it would reduce unpredictability and give the CRTC clearer guidance. 2, we could demand radical transparency. No more private meetings. Every conversation with industry, every piece of data, every analysis, make it public. Let the sunlight in. This would improve accountability. However, it might slow down decision making, and it might reduce the quality of the industry's input if companies are reluctant to share sensitive information with public forums. But it's a public domain. It should be public data. 3, we could change how we appoint the commission, make it a public parliamentary process. Let's have a real debate about who these people are and what they believe in before we hand them the keys to our digital kingdom. This would improve diplomatic accountability. It might prioritize the CRTC if the parliament uses it as a confirmation process to advance partisan interests, though. 4, this is the really weird option, and I like to always throw one in. Maybe we split it up. We should have one agency for cultural stuff, one for broadcasting, and a separate for hard noise, pro-competition regulators for the pipelines and telecommunications. This would allow for more specialized regulation. However, it might create a fragmented and inconsistencies between these agencies if different policies affect different issues on both sectors. I don't know what the right answer is, but I know we need to have the conversation. Because the status quo isn't working. It's not working for entrepreneurs, it's not working for creators, and it's not working for Canadians. Nobody likes what's on TV right now. Nobody. So here's why I wanted to make this video. Because it isn't just some part of some abstract policy debate. This is about the future of our country. It's about whether we're going to be a country that empowers creators and entrepreneurs, or one that puts up walls and picks winners. It's about whether we believe that being weird, being different, being independent is a liability or a superpower. The system we have now, the system that the CRTC represents, is designed for the status quo. It's designed for the big, established, the predictable, the monopoly. It's not designed for us. So what do? It's what we always do. We get loud. We get weird. We start asking the questions they don't want us to ask. Talk to your friends about this. Share this video. Look up information on the CRTC. This is the kind of thing you want to share to your MP and anybody who works in media and tech. Make it loud. That's how we make the change. But most importantly, let me know what you think in the comments. Have you run into this before? Do you know anything about the CRTC? Is there anything you'd like to know? Do you have any ideas on how to fix this? This is the conversation we need to have. We should start it right now. Thank you for watching, and to everybody out there, stay weird.